Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, Fix Your Mix, Using Management Goals to Create Diverse Cover Crop Seed Mixes with Keith Berns of Green Cover Seed. I'm Kelsey Virgin, and I'm a Senior Program Associate with the Pasture Project at the Wall Center, who is hosting this webinar today. To start us off, I'm first going to go over the logistics and how-tos for the webinar system. Then I will talk briefly about the Pasture Project and what we do. Then we will do some audience polling where some questions will appear on your screen. After that, we'll get into our presentation, and then we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for your questions at the end. In terms of the webinar technology, you should see the GoToWebinar control panel on the side of your screen. It should look something like this, with the presentation on the left and the control panel on the right. You can minimize and maximize by clicking the orange arrow at the top. You'll want to use your control panel during the presentation, so it's best to keep it maximized. You can also click on the small triangles below to open and close different parts of the panel, such as the questions pane. You will be in listen mode only during the presentation to minimize background noise, but as you have them, please ask questions in the questions pane throughout the presentation. These will be addressed after the formal presentation during the Q&A time, but if you need clarification at any point or have technical difficulties, ask at any time. There will also be a short follow-up survey that pops up just after the webinar is over. Please take a moment to complete this. It helps us as we develop our future webinars. I will also note that folks calling in without access to a computer will have limited functionality. You will not be able to do polls or ask questions. And just as a note, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the Pasture Project website in the coming week. So a little bit about Pasture Project. The Pasture Project is part of the Resilient Agriculture and Ecosystems Initiative at the Wall Center at Winter Rock International. We work to advance and integrate regenerative grazing as a scalable, market-driven solution for building healthy soil, viable farms, and resilient communities in the upper Midwest, and specifically in a 6-state region in the upper Mississippi River Basin, although we do work with some national audiences. Some of the strategies we use to promote regenerative grazing are we develop a data-backed and field-tested case for regenerative grazing, which we do through on-farm research with a number of on-the-ground partners. Another is providing resources to producers for how to plan for and change to regenerative grazing practices. We also help build an alliance of supporters for regenerative grazing so that together we can reach more folks in more places. And we support shifts in political, financial, and other systems to support regenerative grazing as a widespread practice. Please visit our new website or contact us for more information about Pasture Project's work. Just a note to stay tuned as we plan for webinars in the fall and winter. If you have a topic you'd like to see covered in a webinar or a presenter, do reach out to us and let us know. And you can always stay updated on events and webinars through our website at pastureproject.org/events. All right, so we're going to do some audience polling to help us get a feel for who's in the room. I will launch the questions to your screen and you should be able to click on the most relevant answer. Then I'll close the polls and share the results. And so here's the first question. What is your role in agriculture currently? Choices are row crop producer, livestock producer, mixed row crop / livestock producer, agency, nonprofit, university, or private company staff, or other. So take a moment. We'll give this a few seconds here. Okay. Looks like majority agency, nonprofit, university, or private company staff, and then a good mix of livestock and row crop producers. So welcome everyone. And then we have another poll question here. How many years of experience do you have with cover crops if you are a producer? None, 1 to 3 years, 4 to 6 years, 7 to 10, more than 10. We'll also give this a few seconds. Okay, let's see. So we have a lot of folks who kind of are just starting out, it looks like, and then a good mix of folks who have been doing it for a while. I think that the new folks especially will like seeing how this tool works. So Great. All right. Okay, so on to our presenter for today. I'm going to introduce Keith. Keith combines over 20 years of no-tilling farming with 10 years of teaching agriculture and computers. In addition to no-tilling, 2,500 acres of irrigated and dryland corn, soybeans, rye, triticale, peas, sunflowers, and buckwheat in south central Nebraska. He also co-owns and operates Green Cover Seed, one of the major cover crop seed providers and educators in the U.S. Through Green Cover Seed, Keith has experimented with over 100 different cover crop types and hundreds of mixes planted into various situations and has learned a great deal about cover crop growth, nitrogen fixation, moisture usage, and grazing utilization of cover crops. Keith was honored by the White House as a 2016 Champion of Change for Sustainable Climate Smart Agriculture. Keith also has developed the SmartMix calculator, one of the most widely used cover crop selection tools on the internet. Keith has a master's degree in agriculture education from the University of Nebraska and teaches on cover crops and soil health more than 30 times per year to various groups and audiences. Keith was also recently appointed by Nebraska Governor Pete Ricketts to be the chairman of the Nebraska Healthy Soils Task Force. So thank you, Keith, for presenting today. We're happy to have you here and your expertise.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm going to hand it off to you.
All right. I will try to get my screen shared here. Okay. All right. Can you confirm that you can see my slideshow? I just want to make sure that.
Yep.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yes, it's good to join everybody. I am going to talk about designing cover crop mixes. That's what we do at Green Cover Seed. We feel like we're better than just about anybody else, or at least have more experience than about anybody else in designing these diverse cover crop mixes specifically for improving soil health, but also, lots of grazing. We probably have 2/3 of our mixes go out the door that have a grazing emphasis on it. So just want to get started here. So first of all, I'm just going to take you through kind of some of the questions that we would guide and direct our people through when we are helping them build a mix. And so just want to kind of set the background, if you will, some of the theoretical things. So first of all, if soil health is your goal, then crop diversity cannot be ignored or overstated, because if you're really interested in soil health is built through diversity, and crop diversity will build root diversity will build biological diversity in your soil. So it's just extremely important that we get as much diversity into these soils as what makes sense. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We don't want to just throw things out there if they don't have a chance of working. We want diversity that makes sense. Number two, plants were created to grow in diverse ecosystems. Plants weren't created to grow in monocultures. A monoculture setting is not natural. You don't see that anywhere in a native setting. It's always great diversity in a native natural type setting. And so in production agriculture, that's really hard to do, to get all that diversity in there. There's some guys trying that. But with cover crops, it's relatively easy because we can mix a lot of these things together because we're not trying to mechanically harvest them. So that gives us a huge advantage in being able to plant all these diverse things together. Number three, resiliency comes from diversity. And if you want your crops, if you want your soils, if you want your operation to be resilient, which means it has the ability to recover from a stress of some sort, whether it's a drought stress or a flood stress or any type of stress that might come its way, the more diversity you have, the more resilient that system is going to be, because you've got multiple different species that can step up to the plate when someone else goes down. Number four, we want to have a balanced diet for our soil biology. Biology really drives the whole system when it comes to soils, and even livestock production. The biological activity is such a critical component. And we want to have a balanced diet because we don't want all of our biology to have to just be consuming one thing. And the last point here is just that we want to be in balance, because even good things like a legume or a brassica, which can be a very good thing in our mix, even those, when they're not used in a moderated, balanced setting, they can be harmful. You can overdose on anything, and cattle can overdose on eating any one particular thing. And so we want to give not only the biology but also our livestock that balanced diet, because they generally will make pretty good choices if you give them different options to select. So when it comes to designing a diverse cover crop mix, there's 4 things that we try to get right. We want to make sure we have the right species, we want to have the right inoculants, we want to have the right seeding rates, and we want to have the right timing. And then we also want to answer these 4 questions. What are the goals or concerns that you have? What are the environmental factors that you have? And we'll look at those in just a second here. What is the time frame that you're under? And then what is your budget? So I'm going to look at all 4 of these questions real briefly, and then we'll jump into the tool that I created to kind of help people step through some of these things. So first of all, the first thing that we ask people, if they call in or they shoot me an email or something and want some help building a mix, we're going to ask them, well, what are you trying to accomplish? What do you want to do with this cover crop mix? What is your resource concern? And there's a lot of them. You know, these are 8, you know, everything from soil health and biological life to grazing to erosion control. There's a lot of different things that you can choose as your goal or your concern. Now, I know that the temptation is to say, well, I want to do all those, you know, and isn't that the way we are? We want it all. And oftentimes we can accomplish multiple goals, multiple resource concerns at the same time, but you're not going to be able to accomplish all of them. For example, if we want to have long-lasting residue, that goal is kind of opposed to having lots of nitrogen production from a legume. Because when we produce a lot of nitrogen from a legume, it breaks down pretty quickly. It has a low carbon nitrogen ratio. That residue is not going to last very long out there, and so you'll have bare soil. And that may be okay with what you're wanting to do, but you can't accomplish both of those goals very well at the same time. So before you design your mix, you have to kind of know what you're trying to accomplish, what you want to address for your concerns before we can help you put the mix together. The second thing that we look at is what are your environmental conditions? You know, what kind of rainfall do you have? Do you have irrigation? What's your evapotranspiration, which is an indication of how fast you're going to lose your moisture? What kind of growing season are you working with? Which is going to have a lot to do with where you're at and where you're planting. What's the soil type and condition? How are you seeding it? Are you going to drill it? Are you broadcasting it? Are you going to broadcast and incorporate it a little bit? Because each of those has a little bit different seeding rate that you'd want to do. What was the previous crop? But more importantly, what is the next crop that's coming? Because we don't want to have a cover crop mix out there that's going to harm your next crop. So you need to kind of know that. And then, you know, is there a history of herbicide use? Is there any herbicide carryover issues that may need to be a concern or a factor in selecting some of these cover crops? What is your time frame? There's basically 4 different time frames that people plant cover crops. You can do it in the spring. That's either prior to a spring crop or maybe on some fallow ground that's not going to have a crop that year. You may need to check some crop insurance implications on some of that if you're going into a crop after your cover crop. Early summer, which would be in our area here in Nebraska, would be right after wheat harvest, so middle of June through the middle of July. You know, that you're looking at probably, you know, having the frost terminate a lot of your cover crop, which is kind of nice. You don't have to spend any money to terminate that. We're just about ready to get into what I would consider the late summer planting, and that's either a delay after wheat harvest in this area, or if you're further north, it might be right after wheat harvest or right after some sort of vegetable harvest. I know people will plant cover crops after sweet corn or canning peas or something like that. And also, it may be if you're a grazer, you had a cool season crop, you had rye and triticale, or maybe you had oats and peas planted out there, and so you just got done grazing that, and now you're coming in with the next planting. So we would call that kind of a late summer, you know, kind of from the middle of July through the middle of September, depending on where you're at. And then, of course, the fall seeding the cover crops, coming in after corn harvest, after bean harvest, or just a later planting based on the other rotations that you have within your system. And then what is your budget? You know, because, you know, money is important and you can have the greatest mix in the world, but if it costs too much, it's not a very good mix for you. So, you know, we have people that call in and they have very low budgets, less than $20 an acre. We can work with them. We can help them But what we tell them is you're not going to be able to have very many legumes in your mix for less than $20 an acre, because legume seed is the most expensive. And if you're trying to cut money, cut your budget on this, you're probably going to have very few legumes. Kind of that medium rate is where most of our mixes would fall into, and that's going to be between $20 and $30 an acre. You're going to have some legumes out there. It's not going to be super heavy in legumes. You're not going to get a lot of nitrogen fixation, but there will be some. So that's going to be in that $20 to $30 range. The high range, $30 to $40, we'll get a lot of people in this range if they have irrigation, or if they are in a higher rainfall area and they can really push the amount of seed that they're getting out there. This can also be a higher percentage of legumes if it's an organic producer and they want to try to get a lot of nitrogen out there, or even the higher category. And I do have people that will spend $60 an acre on a cover crop mix, but it's mostly organic folks who are trying to produce 150 pounds of nitrogen so they can grow a big organic corn crop with no additional nitrogen the next year. And that's all possible. That can all be done. There's a mix for each one of those scenarios, but again, you have to come into it kind of knowing what you want to do so that we can help you step through that process. Now, just generally speaking, just a couple of things here. The more specific your goals or concerns are, the less diverse your mixes are going to be. And what I mean by that is if you come to us and say, I need to produce as much nitrogen as I can, and that's really the only thing that's important to me, then that's going to be a much less diverse mix than if you come in and say, well, I want to produce a decent amount of nitrogen, but I also want to really try to protect against erosion. I really want to build up the biological life of the soil. Those are a little bit more general goals, or you're trying to accomplish multiple things. That would be a much more diverse mix that we would help you design to get that. And then the second thing is, the tighter your planting window is, the fewer species are going to work and the less diverse your mixes are going to be. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Here in Nebraska, if it gets to be October 15th and we're just now getting our corn harvested, we're still going to plant a cover crop, but we don't have much time left for that cover crop to grow. So we might only just plant cereal rye by itself. And there's nothing wrong with that. I would rather plant rye by itself than to plant nothing at all. And so the tighter your planting window is, the less time you have for it to grow, the fewer things that are going to work, thus the less diverse your mixes are going to be. And again, don't see that necessarily as a bad thing. See it as it's better than not having anything in there at all. So that's kind of a little bit of the background, a little bit of the theory of what we go through on a daily basis as we help our customers design mixes, or when we're doing it for our own farm here as well, we go through that same thought process. So what I want to show you now, and I'm going to get out of my presentation and I'm going to do a live demonstration for you here. So let me get rid of this. Okay. So on our website, greencoverseed.com, which by the way, we're having a field day August 5th and 6th. So if anybody wants to come, it's a free field day. We're going to be looking at over 100 different cover crop species and quite a few different mix combinations as well. It's the same field tour both days. So if you are interested in coming and looking at a lot of cover crops, if you're not that far away or you happen to be traveling this way, we'd love to have you join us for that. But when you come to our website, there is a button right here that says SmartMix. And when you click on that, it's going to take you to a page for SmartMix calculator. And you do have to have an account to use this. There's no cost. You can sign up for a free account. But we do want to have an account just so if we need to communicate with you, we can. So if you need to sign up for that, there's a place when you're first logging in. When you log in, if you don't have a login, you click right here and it says sign up, or if you forget your password, you can do that as well. When you first get in here, there's just a lot of information that's contained in here. So a couple years ago, I did make some tutorials. In the very bottom right-hand corner, there is a button that says tutorials. And if you click on that, it's going to take you to a page. I've got 3 short videos. One of them is like 8 minutes. One of them maybe is 10 or 12 minutes. And then the last one I think is like 5 minutes. I kind of broke it into different sections. I'm going to be talking about a lot of that same stuff here today. I may get a little bit more into depth into some of this in these videos. So if you're new to the tool, it's not a bad thing to watch those tutorials just to kind of allow me to explain some of the things that are going on, what some of the buttons or some of the tools are. Not a bad idea to do that. So I would encourage you to do that if you're a first-time user, but otherwise, you would start out after you get your account started just by clicking on the button that says Start a Mix. Now, one of the powerful things about this tool is that it knows all of the geographic conditions for all of the zip codes in the United States. And there's 50-some thousand zip codes in the United States. So when I log in, it knows that I live in Blade, Nebraska, because when I signed up for an account, I had to put that in. And so it says, hello, Blade, Nebraska, based on your zip code of 68928. Your average annual rainfall is 26.73 inches. My first frost is around October 3rd, and my last frost is around April 30th. And my plant hardiness zone is 5B. So that's where I live. Now, I can make a mix for anywhere that I want. So I'm going to make a mix for the purposes of this demonstration. I'm going to make a mix, and I just did this for a customer in Indiana. So I'm going to type in, I'm just going to change the zip code. I'm going to put in 47918. And as soon as I put that in, it says, hello, Attica, Indiana. Your average rainfall is 39 inches, so they get about 50% more rain than we do. Their first frost is around October 14th, and their last frost is 4/21. So they've got about 3 weeks longer growing season than I do. And their plant hardiness zone is 5B instead of 6B. So they're wetter and they're warmer. A lot of fun to do mixes for those areas because there's a lot of fun things you can do. So you can put any zip code that you want in there, and it's going to pull up that information, and that's going to help the tool make recommendations. So you just give your mix a name. I'll just call this Pasture Project Test. Tell it how many acres you're going to do. I like to do 100 because that makes the math very simple. You can put any number you want in there. You can also come back later and change any of this if you want. If you have irrigation, you can put irrigation inches in here. If you don't, just leave it blank. One thing that you can do, however, if you are in a drier than normal cycle, you can actually put negative irrigation inches in here, and that will tell the program that you're expecting less moisture than what you normally would get. Because again, SmartMix is going to know your rainfall averages. It knows how much rain you get every month on average using 30-year averages, and it's going to take that into consideration with the recommendations that it gives. So if you're in a drier than normal period, you can put negative irrigation in there. Bagging option, we're going to say we're going to take it in a tote bag, but you can also choose 50-pound bags if that's what you want. Is it a certified organic field? We're going to say no. Seeding method, am I going to drill it? Am I going to broadcast it? Or am I going to broadcast it with incorporation? Well, I know that this customer has a good drill, so we're going to choose drill. The next cash crop that he's going to do, let's just say he's going to do corn since it's the first one there. And then the seeding date. The seeding date is going to come up with today's date, and the termination date is going to be 60 days later. But I can set this to wherever I want. So maybe I'm making this. My customer has told me, well, I'm going to plant this around the 1st of August. So we'll choose the 1st of August. And he says, I'm going to let it just grow through the winter, and I'll terminate it in the spring before I plant corn. So we're going to say this is going to grow till May 11th. Okay. Now the program is going to say I've got 283 days in my growing season. Okay. Now, obviously, a lot of that is through the winter, and it's not necessarily going to be doing much growing. But again, the program knows where you live based on that zip code that you gave. So it's saying I'm going to have 1,558 base 50 growing degree days, and that's for warm season crops. And I'm going to have almost 3,000 base 40 growing degree days. That's for my cool season crops. So based on this, it's going to make some estimates on how much your crops are going to grow. Under the goals, this is where it's very important that you come into this knowing what you want to do, what you want to accomplish, because you cannot go past this screen without giving it at least one goal. You can choose up to 3. You have to have at least one. And so since this is a grazing seminar, we're going to choose supplemental grazing as our #1 goal. And let's choose, we want to increase our organic matter as the second goal. And we'll go ahead and choose a third goal and just say we want to cycle as many nutrients as we can. So we'll choose those 3 goals. We've got all of our information in here. I'm going to hit continue now, and it's going to go to the next screen for us. And there's a lot of information that's going to show up on this screen. So first of all, over on the right-hand side, there's a little box that's going to show all of the financial information. It has a summary of all the choices that you made. If you want to change that, you can click on edit details and you can go back and change any of these things. Right now, it's telling me that my mix is 0 pounds, 0 pounds per acre, and it's costing me $0 because there's nothing there. We'll come back and look at this after I've added some things to it. Let's add some species, then I'll come back and look at what some of these other things do. So to get started, you click the big plus sign right here where it says add species. And what it's going to do is it's going to go through, it's probably got more than 100 different species in the database that you can choose from. And based on all the information that you gave it, where you live, the growing conditions, the growing season, and what your next cash crop is, it's going to kind of rank, or it's going to score these different things based on the conditions that you told it. So it's going to tell me things that are excellent, things that are good, things that are marginal, and things that are risky. Now, if you notice, there's very few things. There's 0 in marginal and 1 in risky. And the reason for that is because when you're planting around the 1st of August, you can really use just about anything you want because it's still early enough. You can use warm season plants, but it's late enough in the season you can use the cool season plants. So it's the best time of the year, in my opinion, to get maximum diversity because everything's on the table as decent choices. So you can go through here and look, and these aren't necessarily in a particular order. They're just in the categories. The excellent ones should be a little bit better than the good ones. But again, this is not an exact science, so we encourage people to look at things in both those categories because either one of them may work for you. And so you look through these and you may say, well, mung beans, I don't even know what a mung bean is. How do I know if I want to choose that? On most of these, not all of these yet, we're still working on it, but on a lot of these, there's this little play button right here underneath where it says mung beans. If I click on that, it's going to bring up a video, and it's going to be myself and another one of my agronomists, Dale Strickler,
These are mung
and we're going to be out in the field actually talking about this crop.
Use a lot of in the summertime. Small seeded, very, very heat tolerant crop.
And so the way this is designed is that as you're going through this, it's a teaching tool as well as a tool to help you put your mixes together because we want you to be able to come in and go, oh, mung bean, that's what a mung bean is. Or what's the difference between woolly pod vetch and hairy vetch? Well, you can click here and watch a video about woolly pod vetch. Same way on the grasses. You know, some of these, like I say, they don't all have them yet. We're working on getting them all put together. But the ones that are there, you know, they're pretty educational to watch. They're usually pretty short, 2 to 5 minutes on each one of these because it's just talking about that particular species. So we encourage people to do that to learn more about it. Once you kind of know what you want or you think you have some ideas, you just start clicking on the things you want to add. So you say, well, I know I want some mung beans because I've heard they grow really well in the heat. 4010 peas are going to be one of the most aggressive growing things in the fall for legumes producing good biomass. And I also want some hairy vetch because I want it to overwinter. So then I go over here to my grasses. Pearl millet, yeah, I don't want pearl millet because it doesn't hold its forage value as well late into the season. But I know that sorghum does, so I'm going to choose a little bit of sorghum here. I've heard really good things about black oats, so I'm going to choose those. And then I want something to overwinter, and I'm not seeing what I'm wanting here, so I may have to go to my good section. And so I find triticale. That's what I was looking for. I want to have some triticale in this mix, so I'm going to add that. Go back to my excellence. And then for brassicas, I know that, you know, I've heard really good things about radishes, and I've heard great things about collards. I want a few of those. And I want to have sunflowers and buckwheat as well. So now I've got 10 things in my mix. It tells me down here how many I've added. So I'm going to click that button, and it's going to put all of these in to the system for me. Now there's a note up at the top. It says I've selected one of these which is sold out, and it's saying if it's not back in stock by the time I want to order, somebody can help you find a substitute. So some things that we're out of, but we know we're getting more back in, we'll leave it in here as a sold out product, but with that little warning note there. And so now it's put all these things in here. So it divides it up. I got my legumes at the top, my grasses are next, my brassicas are third, and my broadleaf plants are at the end. And so right now it put everything in with seeding rates on it, okay? And what it does is there's a feature called SmartMix Auto Adjust. And when that is on, and it is on by default when you first start a mix, when that's on, it's going to evenly divide all of your different mixes, not by the same amount of pounds per acre, because you see each one of these is different, but it's going to divide them by how much influence they have in the mix per acre. So every one of these right now is at 13% of a full rate, of a full seeding rate. And we can change that if we want. The program is automatically going to try to get you to about 125% of a full seeding rate. And that's what we want in a diverse mix, because we feel like we can have more plants in a square foot or in an acre, however you want to figure it, when we have this diversity than we can when we're planting monocultures, because these plants are going to cooperate a lot more than if it was a whole field of the same plant all growing in a monoculture. So that's why we're shooting for 125%. You can certainly go higher, and you can certainly go lower, but as long as this auto adjust button is on, it's going to keep it set at that amount. So I suggest you leave it there initially to start with, and then you turn it off and you can start playing. And we'll do that here in just a second. So now that I've got things added to my mix, you can come over here to the information box. And now I can see I've got 5,265 pounds of seed for my 100 acres. That's 52 pounds an acre. I've got 971,000 seeds per acre. So that's important for some people to know. And you know, a lot of times we do want to shoot for around 1 million seeds per acre, so that's not too far off. It shows me how my breakdown is. I've got you know, by full rate, I've got 39% legumes, 39% grasses. So you can look at that, and by weight and by number of seeds also, it's broken out by that. My cost right now is $38 an acre on this, and that includes the seed, the inoculant, and the mixing charge is all shown in here. If I would have selected 50-pound bags as my bagging option, it would show that in here as well. And you know, so we look at all that and we go, well, you know, $38 is a little bit more than what I was planning to spend. I need to get this a little bit cheaper. So I can come up here now and I can turn off the auto adjust. And now I can come here and I can change this however I want. So I might say, well, you know, this Purple Bounty Hairy Vetch is pretty expensive. You know, most of my grazing is going to be in the fall. I don't necessarily need it over winter. I'm going to change that to 2 pounds instead of 3.75. Now, it's not going to change anything else right now, but it has lowered my cost. And so I can continue to go through here and say, well, I only want maybe 3 pounds of mung beans. Come in here and go, you know, my sorghum, you know, I want a little bit more sorghum, so I'm going to go 5 pounds of sorghum. And you can do this all day long. You know, buckwheat, 5 pounds of buckwheat's a little too much. I may only want 3 pounds of buckwheat and 1 pound of sunflowers. And again, you may or may not know exactly how to change these. We can certainly help advise on that. But the nice thing is about this is that you can do infinite numbers of what if scenarios. You can say, well, what if I change my planting date? Well, you can go back to that first screen and change your planting date. Or what if I change my goals? What if I change these species? What if I decide instead of these radishes, I want to put turnips in instead? Well, you can click this button right here, the X. I can remove my radishes, got rid of them, and then I can come back and I can add more species. And I can come in here and find my turnips. Let's see. Here's my purple top turnips. I'm going to add that to the mix. Now, when you have auto adjust off and you add a new species, it's always going to add it at the rate of 1 pound per acre. And then you can change that to whatever you want. But with auto adjust off, it will always change it to 1 pound per acre. So, I might want, 1.5. So now I look at my mix. Several ways I can evaluate things. I can look at how well did I meet my goals. So the 3 goals that I set, supplemental grazing, I've got 100%. So it's saying this is about as good as it's going to get for a grazing mix. I'm meeting that goal very, very well. Increased organic matter, 80%. And if I'm above, 70, 75% on, if I'm only at that at my first goal, I want to go back and change some things. But on my second and third goal, if I'm above 70%, I think you need to be happy with that, especially if you're meeting your first goal really well. So these are all pretty high goal scores. So from that standpoint, I think I've done okay. I look down at the bottom. There's a couple things down here. One is a carbon nitrogen ratio. The C to N ratio, it's telling me it's 53.32. Again, I don't necessarily, looking at this mix, knowing what I know now, I'm not sure. That may be a little high. It may be okay. You got to remember, we said that this mix is going to grow until May of next year. And so the program knows, for example, that these mung beans in Attica, Indiana, these mung beans are going to die out sometime in the middle of October. And so it's factoring all of that into these calculations. It knows when these different species will die out in the different plant hardiness zones. And it knows which ones are probably going to overwinter and give me growth next spring. And so because I have a pretty decent shot of the triticale, which is going to overwinter, the black oats should overwinter there in central Indiana. And I may see, of course, the hairy vetch will as well. So there's going to be different things that are overwintering here for me. And I can see that down here. I've got these other scores. So 79% on a frost score. And that's how well will these things survive a first frost. A wintering score, 51%. I've got 100% on my diversity score. That's really good because I've got at least 2 things from each of these different family groups. 69% on my drought score, not great, but hey, it's Indiana. I usually don't have to worry about a drought that time of year. Met my grazing goal really well. My nitrogen fixation is only 20%. Is that okay? In this situation, yes, because nitrogen fixation was not one of my top goals. Grazing was, so that's okay. But if I wanted to change that, I could come back and I could change my goals. I could change my species. You can change anything you want, and you can see what it does to your cost. You can see what it does to your different goal scores. And I've got people that tell me, they play with this for hours on end. They'll build different mixes. They'll tweak it. They'll do what if scenarios. I'll have to be honest, I don't spend that much time on it myself. But you certainly can. If you, want to put the time into it, you can get a lot of good information back out. Another feature in here, underneath each species, it tells you what it is. So the WSB here means this is a warm season broadleaf plant. A full seeding rate of these mung beans is going to be 25 pounds. There's about 8,000 seeds per pound, and the cost on it is $1.05 a pound. And so you see that information for each species that you've chosen there. And then there's also this little information icon right here next to each species. It gives some of that same information, but there's a Learn More button. And when you click on that, it's going to take you to a page on our website where it's going to talk more about this particular species. The videos that we had linked in that other part of the SmartMix calculator are going to be tied in here as well. And then there's lots of other basic information here about how you use them, the advantages, disadvantages. This part of the website is getting reworked right now, so this is going to look a lot different down the road. We're not exactly happy with how this is all laid out. So this is going to get better, we think. But right now, you can get to that just simply by clicking that information icon. And again, educating yourself or teaching yourself more about what that particular species is. So you can go through, do all that different stuff and play around with it. You can build your mix. You can delete things, add things, do just about anything you want. Once you get it kind of to the point where you think, this is okay. I'm happy with this mix. I'm happy with my price. I'm ready to submit it. You click the continue button. And it's going to ask you, do you want it shipped or do you want it picked up here in Bladen? Now, a couple of things. you can use the SmartMix calculator, and you do not ever have to order seed from us, okay? You can get a free account. The account is not going to ask you for a credit card number. There's no financial, in fact, you cannot pay for a mix through here even if you wanted to, because we don't have a good enough way of calculating shipping on these. So we never ask you for your financial information on this, because we want to calculate that. And we also want to review the mixes that you made to make sure there's not something in there that we see that we could make a suggestion on to either save you money or make you a better mix. So if you're not going to order seed from us, that's fine. You just never have to hit the continue button. And actually, you would want to hit the continue button, because I'll need to show you where you can just be able to save it. So you can just say, well, I want to ship it to me, and it's going to say somebody will contact you before finalizing the order. Do you want to use your default address, or you can put it in a new shipping address? You hit continue. You get a chance to review it, and if you want to go in and edit anything, you can. The other thing that you can do right here is you can type notes that say, hey, Keith, look this over. Let me know what you think. And so you can type in anything you want there. It might say, hey, I want this to ship with my neighbors whose name is blah, blah, blah. We want them to ship together. You can communicate any notes you want to there. And this is where if you are not very close to us, or you're not really interested in ordering seed from us because you've got a local seed provider you're happy with, that's completely fine. That's completely okay. Just don't hit the confirm and complete button. All you have to do is hit save for later. If you hit save for later, I don't even know that you were in there building a mix, because it's not ever going to let me know that. If you hit confirm and complete, it's going to send me an email saying so-and-so just submitted an order, and then basically I will look it over. One of my salesmen will look it over, and then we'll get back to you with some comments, some suggestions, and a shipping quote. So I'm going to go ahead and say confirm and complete. And it will go ahead and process the order here. And then it's going to say, thank you, the order's been received. You'll get a confirmation email shortly. It tells me what the order number was. What do you want to do next? Do you want to go to your saved mixes? Do you want to start a new mix? Well, you can go to your saved mixes. I'll just click on that quick here. And here's the Pasture project test mix that we're working on. Here's some other ones that I've done. These are ones that I've actually ordered. So here's the Pasture project test one that I've ordered. If I want to come back a year from now, I really like that mix. I like how it worked. I can come in here and I can pop that open, and it gives me a summary of what it looks like. I can reorder that if I would like. And what it does when I click reorder, it's not automatically going to just submit the same thing again. It's basically going to give you a chance to change anything you want. So it's putting all of your details in here. You click continue, it'll bring you to the same screen. So you can take the mix that you did last year, and you can say, well, you know, I really like what the collards did. The turnips didn't do very well at all. So I'm gonna get rid of my turnips, and I'm gonna turn my auto adjust off so I can change things. I'm gonna get rid of my turnips, and I'm gonna add 2 pounds of collards because they did so well. And so you can sit here and you can change it and modify it, but you don't have to start from scratch. You can start from what you had last year, and then go all the way through the process, and again submit it again. Or like I say, you can have 5 or 6 different mixes started. Just hit the save for later button. You can come back later and work on them. You can come back later and compare them. You can print it out and take it to your local seed dealer and say, hey, can you get me all these seeds? I know we have people do that all the time, and that's okay. This is a free tool out there for people to use, for people to hopefully educate themselves, teach themselves more about the cover crop process. Some people get into this tool expecting it to tell them exactly what they need for a mix, and when they find out that they actually have to give their own input and make their own decisions, they're disappointed. You know, and you know, I always like what Dwayne Beck, some of you know Dwayne Beck, he's a kind of a gruff old guy, but he's one of the smartest guys in agriculture today. You know, and when people ask him what cover crops they should be planting, he always says, hey, I didn't help you pick out your wife. I'm not going to help you pick out your cover crops. You need to make those decisions yourself. So this is giving you some information and some basis to help you make those decisions, but you still have to make the decisions and you still have to kind of take some of that responsibility. So that's what the SmartMix calculator is. Like I say, we're improving it all the time. We're always changing it. We're always open to information or feedback. And I think if you hit the support button down here, let me just see, I think you're able to send a support ticket in from that. Yeah. So if you want to have a question or something, you can just type that in here, or you can just send me an email, keith@greencoverseed.com. You can send me an email at any time, and we can sure get back to you on any of the information. So I'm going to stop there. I think that fairly well explains what's going on with the SmartMix calculator, and we want to spend the rest of our time taking questions.
Yeah, thank you, Keith. That was a great presentation. Clearly a very well thought out tool. Very impressive. I think I really like how it helps the producer really think through the whole process of cover crops. You know, what are your goals? What's your budget? And I particularly like how if you're not sure what a seed is, you can click and watch a video about it, which is just clearly there's been so much thought put into this tool, and it's free, which is the other really amazing thing. So
Free is good. Free is good.
yeah, it is definitely. So we're ready to take y'all's questions. As I said before, there is a questions pane in the control panel, so feel free to type your questions in there. We do have a couple to start us off here. So if you are interested in grazing a cover crop between corn and beans, and you're trying to avoid herbicide termination, what are some of your options for species and termination methods?
Well, that's a hard one because it is infinitely harder than most people think to terminate a cover crop by grazing. Especially, you know, if you're going to go between corn and beans, you're looking at some sort of winter biennial, rye, triticale, winter barley, hairy vetch, red clover, things like that. They have to make it through the winter because you're typically not going to have enough time to get enough growth in the fall to make it worthwhile. So they've got to overwinter and give you some spring growth, which is good, and that's going to be good for the soil. The problem is then it becomes a problem to try to terminate that. And I've seen guys come in and they'll have 500 cattle out there and they'll just graze, especially cereal rye. They'll just grub it right into the ground. It just looks like it's deader than a hammer. They'll go out there and they'll plant their corn, and then that rye just comes roaring back. And it's really difficult to terminate strictly by grazing. If you let the crop get very mature to where it's kind of heading out, then it's more susceptible to being killed by grazing or rolling. It's kind of a little bit of the same effect. But when you're doing it and these plants are in the vegetative stage, you're likely not going to kill them simply by grazing or mowing or even rolling. A lot of people will roll or crimp, and that can be effective, but there's a relatively narrow window of when it can be effective. That plant has to really be at a very specific growth stage, and for most of them, it's kind of at that anthesis stage where they've made a head or they've bloomed and they're now starting to shed pollen. That's typically when they're at their most susceptible time frame. The problem is you're not necessarily going to wait till then to graze. You're going to be grazing sooner than that. If you're not grazing and you're just growing this out as a cover crop, as a green manure type crop, you can have some success rolling it down at that stage. But if you graze it early on, what you do is you set those plants back. So you could graze it and then think, well, I'm going to let it regrow and get to that anthesis stage to now where I can roll it. And that's not a bad thought. But the problem is when you every time you graze it, you are setting that plant back and it starts over. And so in order to get the anthesis, you're getting later and later and later. And if you're in a totally forage-based system, that's not a problem at all to do that. But if you're trying to get a crop of corn or beans in a timely fashion yet in the spring, that becomes pretty difficult to do. So I guess my answer is really not a good answer. It's really hard to terminate something strictly by grazing. But with that being said, I will also say this. I have been on farms of some organic no-tillers, and actually one of them was in that Attica, Indiana area. And they are, they're doing organic no-till. So they're planting crops. They're not doing any chemical termination. They're not doing any tillage. They're doing as much rolling as they can. They're using mowers. They're using different things like that. And they're getting some pretty decent crops to grow, even when their cover crops come back and they're all kind of growing together. And so, again, depending on your system and how you're set up, you don't always have to have complete termination of your cover crop. The goal is to have it knocked back enough to let your cash crop get out ahead. And once that, especially corn, if corn gets out ahead of something, it's always going to keep up and it's going to grow pretty well. The problem with corn is if you have your cover crop or your forage crop or whatever, if it comes back too fast, it can really hurt your corn yield. So that's a great question. We'd love to be able to do more of that. It's just really difficult to do that very well with what we've got available to us now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I understand. I've heard that from others as well, that you really can't count on grazing to fully terminate. But what I heard you say though is like also maybe expand your thinking a little bit, and maybe you don't need to terminate as much as you thought you did.
Yeah.
So that's helpful. Okay, another question for you, Keith. What's the easiest way to find out which species hold their forage value well through the season? Is there a way to see which species are better for fall forage versus spring?
Yeah, that's a really good question. A lot of that is going to be in those videos, when Dale and I are out in the field. And so, for example, we're standing in the millet plot. And we'll talk about millet, and we'll talk about it's fine stemmed, it's really good grazing, it's good quality. There's no prussic acid, so you can graze it at the time of the first frost. And then we'll say, but millet is not going to hold its forage value after a frost nearly as well as sorghum does. So if you're grazing, if you're planting this in the early summer and you want to graze it in the late summer and early fall, it's a great plant to use. But if you want to stockpile graze it in November and December and January, there's better choices because millet's going to fall down. It's going to lose its forage value. You're just not going to get as much out of it. So we talk about a lot of those things very specifically, particularly when it comes to the differences in the sorghums, because we probably carry 10 or 12 different sorghums or sorghum sedans, and each one has a little bit different use, different purpose. And so those videos, we'll talk about, well, here's where you'd use a brachytic dwarf. Here's what photoperiod sensitive is and why it's important. Here, this one is a dry stock plant. It's really good for putting up, dry hay. And so we'll go through and talk about those individual characteristics in those videos. So that would be my recommendation. Those are all on YouTube. If you go to our YouTube channel, Green Cover Seed YouTube channel, those videos are all on there, and you can get on there and I think you can watch each one of them individually, or I think there's a playlist where you can watch like the whole series where we go through the whole plot. And by the way, the tour that we're having on the 5th and the 6th, we are going to try to videotape part of that as well, where we will be talking about those different species. So if you can't make it to the tour and you're interested in seeing a video of us going through the plots and talking about them, send me an email. I don't know how soon we'll get the video done. Sometimes we get the videos made and don't really have the bandwidth to edit them until the winter time. But we'll get them up on YouTube eventually. But we have literally hundreds and hundreds of hours of videos on our YouTube channel, and so that's the place I would start.
Yeah, well, so it sounds like if you really want to nerd out about some cover crops, there is lots and lots of videos at your disposal. So thank you for sharing that. And speaking of sorghum, so here's a question: how should someone looking to integrate some sorghum be thinking about? Not sure how to say this. Prussic, P-R-U-S-S-I-C acid risk when designing redesigning a mix?
Yeah, that's a good question. And prussic acid is an issue in sorghum. You can graze sorghum with the prussic acid all the way through the growing season. Where it gets really dangerous and where you have to pull your cattle off is when it freezes. Because what happens is prussic acid there's two different chemicals or two different compounds in this plant, in the leaves of a sorghum plant. And when they combine with each other, that's when they form the prussic acid. The prussic acid isn't actually in the plant while it's growing, but the components of prussic acid are. And so when an animal eats that, it will form prussic acid in the animal's digestive system, but it's generally at low enough concentrations it's not an issue. But when it freezes, the cell walls of that plant burst, those compounds come together inside the plant, and it's very high levels and concentrations of prussic acid, and you can kill animals by grazing sorghum right after it's frozen. Now, after about a week, 7-8 days, that prussic acid will dissipate, it volatilizes, it goes away into the atmosphere. You can graze it all winter long with no issues or no problem. So it's a pretty short window that you have to worry about. The problem becomes if you get a frost that kills some of your sorghum but not all of it, then you got to go, okay, I better pull them off for a week and then I can come back in, but then 4 days later you get another frost. And so that's where it can be a little tricky, is when you get a frost that kills some of it but not all of it, you may have to pull out 2 or 3 times. So here's a couple strategies that you can do. Number one, if you have a relatively decent sized field and you know you're going to be grazing out there around that time of the first frost, what we tell people to do, plant 3/4 of that to a sorghum based mix, because sorghum is the most productive summer annual you can plant by far. You got to have it in there to get that tonnage. So plant 3/4 of it to that, be grazing on that up till the time of the first frost, and then you can graze that later too. But take 1/4 of those acres and plant it to a millet-based mix, which has no prussic acid. Don't graze on that section of the field until it freezes. Then you just push all your cattle over to that millet part, and they can graze there without any worries, and then you move them back later on. So it's almost like having a kind of a little rescue area, if you will, but it's still planted to a cover crop, but it's a different cover crop mix. It's a little bit more of a hassle. You have to plant that separately. But depending on your management style, it may be well worth doing to not have to worry about it. You just move the cattle over there and you graze on the millet side instead of the sorghum side. So that's one thing to do. Again, you just have to manage and have a plan for when it freezes, so how to get them pulled off there if you're going to be out there at the time of the first frost. If you're stockpile grazing late in the season, it's not a worry at all. If you're going early and you're grazing that off early, again, not a worry at all. It's just at that time of the frost when you have to manage around it.
Yeah, and it sounds like use your observation skills, which is something we talk about a lot whenever you're really pay attention to what's going on out there. I think we have time for one question, and this probably is a quick one. Could you set up the calculator for interseeding at V4?
Yes, we've had that request quite a bit. We are going to be working on that. It is a whole different kind of set of calculations, because now it kind of throws all of our calculations on seeding rates kind of out the window, because I no longer want a full seeding rate, because I've got a full seeding rate of corn out there. Now I just need a complementary rate. And so we're trying to figure out how to do that. Right now, it's not really built into that very well. There's some pieces of it in there. We're going to work on developing that. 60. People ask about 60-inch corn. There's a lot of different things that are going to eventually get built into this. We just have to figure out how to get smart enough to put the information in to where, because I'd rather have no information than to have poor information.
Right.
And so we do a lot of one-on-one consulting with what we think would work best for V4. But the calculator is a little weak in that area right now, but definitely is on our list of things that we want to incorporate.
Awesome. Yeah, so it sounds like stay tuned for that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to kind of wrap us up here. Thank you, everyone, for attending and for your thoughtful questions. Just a reminder to keep looking back at our website and follow us on social media to keep track of events. Our social media is run through the Wallace Center. And don't forget to complete that survey. We do read it, and it really helps us develop webinars, and we share it with our presenters as well. And just some contact information, please feel free to reach out to myself or to Keith if you have any questions. We're happy to help.